hello to everyone who's checking in. I think I'm David Foster. Obviously, I've been doing on the offense. There's been a bit of a break recently, it's nice to be back, and particularly today with Rory, who uh, I consider a longstanding compatriot and friend. Having watched all the things he's accomplished over the years. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but particularly about his experience most recently at AgriBriefing. This incredible transaction, I was sort of starting at zero and turning into something absolutely spectacular. And the lessons I think learned there, uh, as you'll hear around kind of doing the right kind of work if you're trying to lead a company. Um, I've talked to Rory a fair amount about this, and I think you're going to see, if you haven't heard him speak about some of these things before, that I've never heard anyone articulate how to do the right things to grow the value of your work, not necessarily for selling the business, but to make your content more valuable, to make your customer experience more valuable. So Rory, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. You energize me every time. And for those who came on late, we agreed this would all be fun. There'd be no worries. There's no disappointments on this one. So that'll make it even better. Um, when Rory and I were doing the setup call on this, we talked. There's actually quite a bit of research coming out now around the topic of sort of value versus growth, making the correct product decisions that align with your customer groups. Rory, you mentioned a PwC study that you thought was really good. Collingwood's just done some research. You do just want to lead off with the PwC thing, and then
Yeah, so there's a few things that I've had sort of pinned on my wall as I've been on this journey. And I think the starting point is I worked in corporate life for the man for the good best part of 20 years. And if I think back to my experience of doing that, and I remember what my priorities were, they were usually producing an annual budget and managing to that in terms of what I was trying to do. Or very occasionally you'd come up with a 3-year plan and you'd say we need to do something that's a bit outside the 12-month cycle.
yeah,
But generally, my definition of success or failure was whether I delivered that revenue and profit number each year. That was what I was working on. And I suppose my experience over the last 15 years, which has been in private equity backed businesses, has changed my view on things. And that it isn't all about profit and revenue, but it's actually about there's a whole load of other things that go into creating value and building a good business, which aren't just about moving that dial forward or brand extensions or a whole load of things. So I had a couple of pieces of paper pinned on my wall. One was from a PwC presentation that I went to in probably about 10 years ago, which was just talking about the different component parts of value creation in business information. And it divided into 3 different sections. One was around revenue optimization. So all the good things that we do all the time. How do we get people to spend more money? How do we add users to our contracts? How do we improve retention? How do we launch new products? That was the sort of revenue focus of growing a business and growing value. But then there were a whole load of other sections. So there was about the operational side of it. How do I make sure that my business is positioned around much more reliable, renewable forms of income? How do I make sure that I really understand the pain points of my customers and develop products which have mission criticality for them? How do I improve my internal teams, my management team? How do I get great people to come and work in the business? And then the things around sort of back office efficiency. So how do I make sure my systems are right? How do I make sure I have the right data to make judgments against? And that increases the value of your business as well. And then the final bit was really around the sort of M&A piece, the sort of buy and build So where I had new opportunities or adjacencies, was it easier to go and buy those companies and bolt them together rather than launching something from scratch? Was that a more efficient use of my budgets and time? Because we all know building, especially subscription products, takes a long time. It's hard work, right? And
Yep.
you got to put a lot of investment up front into that. So might it be better to go and buy someone else's hard work and then just run it more efficiently? And if you can do that at scale, then there's a big price to get to. So I was starting with a value. I was working on what I needed to get to, and I was thinking about all of those component parts and making sure I was paying attention to each of
Yeah.
those rather than getting lost in the day to day. How do I make my month's numbers, or how do I make up for a shortfall somewhere by launching a new conference or something like that, which it had been very much my sort of the shape of what I'd done in a corporate life.
Yeah. When we were talking about this, Rory, you mentioned something that I think would be true for everyone here, whether, like you said, launching a new event, or back in the old days needing to sell 65 pages of ads for the next month's issue, that kind of thing. How the paradox between how much work is involved to do that, and the fact that you actually said at one point you had cases where you did all this high energy work and decreased the value of what you had. So, do you want to just comment on
Yeah,
that a little bit?
that's a weird concept, but I think it's important. So when we think about value, this doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to sell my company. It
Yeah.
just actually means I've got a better company. I've got a more robust company. I've got better quality of earnings. So if you think at one extreme, I'm selling ads. I've got an empty book every month, and I've got to fill it with marketing services revenue. I've got to go out and sell those ads every month. I've got to do that. And when I finish, I've got to start again. That's hard work, right? And I might generate a load of money, but when I come to sell that business, or someone comes to look at the value, they go, well, what are we actually buying? I've got to go
Yeah.
and sell that each month. Whereas if I'm spending my time building premium data products, which are sold on enterprise subscriptions, on 12-month or multi-year contracts that are embedded into customer workflow that I know renews at 95% each year, and I know I have quite a lot of pricing power, I've got a much more valuable business. I might be making the same amount of money.
Yep.
And what I've seen several times is people who actually have valuable elements of their business, which are hard work, and they have non-valuable elements of their business which are slightly easier. The events is the classic example. Let's just throw in another event to try and do that. And you suddenly accidentally become an events company. And previously you had a subscription business, and you had the subscription business, which was the largest revenue earner and was more reliable, but maybe not growing as fast. And maybe you had, I don't know, 40% of your revenue was subscriptions and 60% was marketing services. And accidentally, over time, you flip that. So you've got a 60% marketing services business and a 40% subscriptions business. And you might be making more money, but you might have accidentally made your business less valuable on the other side, because you've got a poorer quality of earnings in terms of what you're doing.
Could I maybe just comment on two particular things in that area? And I noticed, I think Carl Myers is on the call. He was on a Collingwood call, I think, just recently, talking about the impact of technology and AI. But two things that came up when you and I were talking: if you, in an effort to keep the growth going, you inadvertently increase complexity.
Yeah.
So two things you noticed. I know you mentioned you suddenly have a senior leadership team that can't speak to the mission clearly because it's so complex. Everybody has a different story, which is a huge value decreaser. And then, of course, now in the AI environment, if you've got a very complex business, trying to apply revolutionary technology across, that's also a huge problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. And because I've been in private equity environments for the last 15 years, one of the lessons you learn is I have to keep things simple, because private equity guys are actually not that sophisticated. On one level they are, but on another level, they need to immediately decide which bucket to put you in. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got to be
Yeah.
able to tell your story very, very succinctly. I am a pricing and data specialist. Okay. That's
Yeah.
what I do. The fact that I do a few conferences and things like that, which are part of it, is irrelevant. But that's the bucket that they put me in. And that's
Yeah.
where they start to judge in terms of multiples and value
Yeah.
and things like that. So the more complicated you make it, the harder you make it for, in this case, a private equity company to work with. And the
Yeah.
example I think we spoke about was, I was looking at a business the other day with private equity. It was a friend's business that he's preparing for sale. And it's growing at 20 plus percent top line. It's a nice business in a
Good for
nice
them.
sector. And when I looked at it, I was saying, tell me your story when you're pitching this business. Tell me what you're trying to sell. And he was talking, it got complicated. He was talking about the different natures of what he was doing and the different revenue streams. And he's got more conferences, and this conference are double in size and things like that. I said, well, what about that 20% of your business over there that's in premium data? What are you doing there? And he said, well, I can't move the dial fast enough in time for our sales. So I've sort of mothballed that a little bit, and we're going all out to develop our conference activity. And my challenge to him was, wouldn't it be a nice story if you said, we're doing all of this revenue generating stuff over here in conferences and all of those areas, which is going really well. But the long-term aim is we're recycling that cash generation into this really nice data product that we've built, that we've already shown quite a lot of success. It's 20% of the company now, but we think it can get to be the dominant part of it. But we're doing this stuff for brand building and cash generation in order to invest deeper into this data product. And the net effect of that is a much more compelling story than we just need to run around doing more and more of these things to keep the top line going.
Yeah. So I think you, as you said right at the top of that, even if you're not selling the business or in your senior management team, and that's not part of your mandate to do that, this I sort of envision this mystical private equity person showing up at management meetings and sort of raising their hand and saying, have you noticed, the dusty thing over in the corner? Because that's actually what's very appealing. So I would say to everyone on the call, whatever your job title is, thinking that way about
understand how valuation metrics work in media. There's a huge range. So you can have a business doing exactly the same revenue and exactly the same profit that can be worth 10 times as much as another business doing that. Why is that? It's because the other business is a better quality business. It's more forecastable. It's more reliable in terms of what you do. And one of the things that I would encourage people to do is, even if you're operating your business and you never have any intention of selling it, whatever you're doing, is to adopt a little bit of that private equity mindset. And what you do at the start of a private equity journey over 3 to 5 years is you build something called a value creation plan. And you say,
could you maybe just talk about, because you got the gorgeous XY axis of what happened in agribusiness. Could you use yourself as an example on this one?
Yeah, so there's two sides. So to start with, our journey was very, very traditional B2B media. We bought a weekly magazine for farmers. And we bought it, it's no secret, we bought it at 4 times its annual profits. So it's a very profitable, lovely business with a great brand and a great opportunity in that space. But we knew that business had been declining by 2-3% every year. It was a print weekly. It relied on classified advertising, a whole load of different areas, but it still did 10 million pounds of revenue and made 2.5 million pounds of profit, something like that, which we bought for 10. Now, we could have carried on. We could probably have done a better job with that. We could have sold maybe a bit more advertising, reversed that slow decline. added in a few more products around it, hired better people, run it slightly better. But that's hard work, right? You're really going against history, and you're doing a whole load of things. So our premise was, don't think of what we bought as a weekly magazine or a weekly newspaper. Think about it as access to a community that is really valuable, and think about the supply chain who wants to reach that community. And if you start from that point of view, it opens up a very different way of looking at your product. So we developed data services, we built legal activities, we added on grant checking services for subsidies, we built a membership platform for subscribers, and that allowed us to more than double the revenue that we got from those customers. And so the premise of that was saying, if we carry on managing this as a weekly newspaper, the only thing that's going to happen is this is going to eventually die, and we might stall it for a little bit longer than the previous owners would have done. But if we think about this as a really interesting community with a whole load of dynamics and lots of pain points that we can answer in multiple ways, then we can re-energize that business. So within 3 years, we had double the profits of that business, and we eventually did a secondary private equity transaction at 10 times. So we doubled the profits and more than doubled the value and the multiple value of what we'd done. So a £10 million product had suddenly become a £43 million product within
And
3 years.
that was expanding. That was primarily a move towards community rather than straight
Yeah, it
media.
was. In that
Yeah.
case, it was. And it was really about understanding that if we can, in order to put some energy back into this business and in order to make it more valuable, we needed to change the profile of the way in which the business made money.
Yep.
Okay, so it wasn't a lot of transactional stuff. It wasn't an industrial process. It was a lot more about building a community, building a membership operation, adding in higher value services in terms of what we are doing, being able to charge and demonstrate that we delivered more value for those customers. And so that was the start of the journey. Later on, we ended up with price reporting agencies and commodity benchmarks and a whole load of different areas. And the story about that transition is a long one, but we ended up with a business that was valued in the mid-20s times multiples, rather than the 4 that we'd started at in traditional media. And so that business wasn't actually that much bigger. I mean, it was bigger, but it wasn't that much bigger. But the value of the business had gone up over 20 times during the course of 10 years.
I'm required at this point to mention that currently in North America, we have a company that's doing less than $1 million US in revenues per quarter, and is currently valued at 5.2 billion. So apparently the person who's the head of that organization is smarter than Rory is, which is quite astounding given who that unmentionable individual might be. But anyway, back to the narrative. But I hope I've seen Rory talk about this with a whiteboard next to him, and if you can imagine this X, Y axis of define the two axes.
Let me maybe present through the medium of mime, David, and we'll work on that basis. So if you think about value creation in media, especially around B2B and sale of information, if you imagine a y-axis, an x-y-axis, y-axis is going up in terms of the criticality of the information that you provide. So think top of that chart, I'm providing information that someone can't do their job without. Okay. So in my experience, when I'm providing benchmark pricing for commodities, if someone's buying, selling, or trading those commodities, think about, I don't know, a Reuters terminal if you work in financial markets. It's very, very hard to do your job unless you know real-time access to stock information. You could probably do it on delayed information, but you'd be at a significant competitive disadvantage to your peers. So that y-axis, how important is the information that I provide to my customer and to their ability to do their job? The other side, the x-axis, is then how easy is it for my customer to gather that information for themselves? Or are there multiple suppliers of that information?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you think about services which are at the bottom of both of those graphs, okay,
Yeah.
this information isn't very important. I can skip it, and there are loads of suppliers of it. Think about free sheet daily news or a lot of the online information services. The only way in which you can monetize those type of audiences is through advertising.
Yeah.
And you have to have big scale in order to make any money. Okay. And that's the problem that the BuzzFeeds of this world and all of those people got into, is my day doesn't stop if I don't have access to this. And actually the only way, no one's going to pay me a subscription for it. So that's that down there. Those businesses are not very valuable. They might be profitable. And you think about some of the huge scale plays in that space, they might be profitable, but they're not very valuable.
Yeah.
Think about the other extreme, my Reuters terminal example, or Bloomberg, or whatever it is that you have. I have this embedded in financial institutions. There's multi-billion-dollar trades which are tied to having that information. And really, my only choice is usually between Reuters and Bloomberg. So they can both charge a lot of money for it. You buy seats for that information, and you consult it in real time to do your job. That is valuable. That's why those type of businesses carry the premium. And that's why you can't do without it. So I see my job wherever I am on that path. If you imagine an arrow up and to the right between those two axes, my job is to move up and to the right. So my example of Farmer's Guardian that I mentioned before, it wasn't particularly valuable. It was specialist information, but there was another rival that did that. If I didn't buy this week's copy, I could still do my job. I could still go out and farm. And so it was probably somewhere around that sort of 4, 5, 6 times valuation. But by adding in legal services, buying groups, data services, membership operations, all of those things, I could push the value up that line to eventually get it to 10, which was what we did on our secondary transaction. And so that was the value creation.
Yeah, you mentioned moving to pricing, all the things we all talk about, more predictive analytics.
So wherever you are on that case. So there are businesses which command 50, 60, 100 times EBITDA valuations. Your example earlier on is maybe not the right one, but there are premium
They're actually good businesses, you mean? Yeah.
There you go. So premium data businesses. So you think about, I don't know, Salesforce valuations or Snowflake or whatever it is. You've got SaaS-based services embedded into products where really you can charge almost what you want, because the cost of unbundling it is very difficult for a company. So wherever you are on that line going up and to the right, I see the fundamental job of a media owner is to push things further up. Okay. Yes, I've got to grow it. Yes, I've got to grow my profits and revenue. That's a given. But ultimately, my job is to make my business better, which is another way of saying more valuable by pushing it up and to the right.
Well, you also commented, and please, anyone, throw questions on the chat, and we'll open it up for discussion in a few moments. So I could, Rory, everything you're saying, we could dive down on, because everything you mentioned changes the way you look at your go-to-market strategies, your definition of product, so, and in fact, at the end of the cycle, if I remember correctly, your original, sort of magazine universe, the 4X products that you started with, you actually divested before you went to market, because they were good revenue, but they were clutter as far as the mission. Is that kind of
it is. It's exactly that. So you can have a business which is great, and on the surface of it, that business was fabulous, hugely profitable, nice margin, growing well. But what it was doing, because we had that traditional media and we actually had a large exhibition as well that we developed on
Yeah,
one side, and then we had these commodity pricing data businesses over on the other side.
yeah,
We were experienced what's known as negative arbitrage in that environment. So
yeah,
that having the profitable, nice, old-fashioned business over here was dragging down the multiples of the rest of the business. Okay.
yeah,
So all the stuff I was talking about changing your multiples, we were actually a victim of having a good business that was less valuable as a result of having that. So we divested it. Then we had a pure play data price reporting agency on the other side, and that then unleashed the real
yeah,
value and made it a
yeah,
super competitive sale process when we went through that.
yeah. I have tried unsuccessfully at various points to I think there's a US expression, lipstick on a pig. But I had for a long time I had a legacy, what used to be a list rental business
You
that's
had your own
outdated.
pig.
And I had a huge amount of revenue from that business. So you're trying to hang on to the revenue, but if you ever went to market, you'd literally be saying to people across the table, "Don't look over there.
Yeah.
That no, that revenue is just part of the whole thing. It's actually a data business or something. You
Yeah,
can't.
I mean,
You're not going to fool anybody."
we had one of those, and actually, one of the price reporting businesses that we had a print shop below it in New Jersey,
Yeah,
and we tried to disguise it in the sale process. And I remember taking the new owners over to New Jersey, and they opened the floor to the ground floor, and they said, "What the hell's that?" And there were huge printing presses and old marketing services stuff. But because it was so small, I was able
yeah,
to get away with it in the same way that we did do conferences off the side of the data business.
yeah,
But because they were kept maintained and they were, as Robin shouting, they were
yeah.
maintained
I,
and kept
it's
as a
some
small
anonymous
part of
person
it.
known
I
as
got
Robin Crumby's wife.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah,
I got the valuation for the data businesses
yeah.
translated into the conferences as well because they were a small enough part.
They were.
They weren't the dominant bit of what we were doing.
Yeah, yeah. Could you, before we go to I think that actually might be Victoria. I'm assuming it's Victoria. But the before we go to that, could you had this glorious transaction, actually executed what you're talking about in a way that's, worthy of praise, and it's a beautiful thing what you did. The did could You did it sort of right as the AI revolution was occurring, which could be empowering in a way because then you can describe a narrative. Look, we got up to 10x, but here's the route to get to 20x. And I should mention, I think Will Bailey's on this call from 67 Bricks. Next month, we're talking about some of their clients on OTO and how they're trying to do exactly the same thing you're talking about, but including the AI technology thing on it. So that's a plug for next month's OTO. But do you want to just comment before we go to Victoria on because that seems like a tool where smaller organizations can become become essential in a way that increases the value of content. And
Yeah,
what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, wherever you are on that journey, wherever you
Mm,
are on that sort of arc that I mentioned, there is always a push. So you might
yeah,
think you get right up to the top right, which some people might categorize the business we ended up in and sort of price reporting.
yeah,
But there's always further to go. So
mm,
we built a business which provided something like 5,000 individual prices for agricultural commodities around the world. And lots of people ingested that information via API into their management systems. And they paid
yeah,
us a lot of money to do that. But
Yeah.
actually, when we sold the business to a company called Mintech, one of the things that they were doing, they were in the same space, but they were actually developing far more into the sort of forecasting, risk management services, predictive analytics, all of those type of areas. They still had that core of data, but they'd made that next step into what do I do with this data and what are the actions that I should take in those areas. So the path, wherever you start from, if you start from a simple B2B publication or an events business or whatever it is, there is always further to go. And that, again, that should be the challenge for us as media owners and controllers,
Yeah.
is to move that further and further on. And that's where the riches lie, right? You're suddenly getting into very valuable businesses, and they are valuable because they're very hard to compete against. They have moats around them. They have barriers to entry for other people. And they are the type of things which are embedded into the workflow of clients. And that's extremely valuable.
I can't think of anyone in the events side who's done this as successfully as you did, Rory. But I've had a number of conversations with good mutual friends in the last month where I can see people who are, let's say 95% events revenue, which compared to what you're talking about seems like a lot more work, but they're actively, I'd say in most cases, they're sort of at the very intellectual and clever stage of monetizing communities. So you can see.
Well, there are models there. There are models there, right?
Yeah.
I know quite a lot of people in the event space. So
Yeah.
there are models which are increasingly around direct introductions and one-to-one meetings that you set up at events, which allow you to charge your sponsors significantly more because you can start demonstrating ROI to those customers or delivering more value. There's a company called Hanson Wade, for example, in the UK, which works in the pharmaceutical and medical space, where they are taking a lot of the content that they use in events and building drugs databases on the side and medical testing services and subscription services, and using that community to start reshaping what their business is. So my point that I'm saying is that I think we were lucky, right? We got into a very premium area. We managed to buy businesses relatively cheaply and do not particularly clever things to them, but make them loads more valuable. But there are these journeys that everyone can go on. And if you start from the point of view of my job is to create value rather than my job is just to grow revenue, that is, I think, intellectually a better place to be, and allows you a framework to think about why you're doing what you're doing. The guys at Collingwood use the phrase, and I know lots of other people do, about working on your business rather than in your business. And that is one of the things which I've been as guilty of as anyone else in my corporate life, working in the business and delivering numbers rather than thinking about why I'm doing what I'm doing, and making sure I'm not a busy fool running around doing something which isn't actually creating the value. And I'm focusing intellectual resource on the things which make the difference to my valuation of the business.
Yeah, exactly. I would, this is a way of passing over to Victoria if you want to jump in and ask your question. But when you think about from the time you bought the initial trade magazine, to the time you sold, how long was that entire?
So it was probably 10 years.
Yeah, it was just about 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years and 3 PE transactions during that time. So at each time we were moving along that path, and at each time we had a plan, and there was an underlying sort of DNA about how we believe value was created, but obviously the shape of what we were doing was changing between those phases.
Also, when you think of, maybe just to summarize it, Rory explaining this, I think, sort of keeping your eyes on the prize as powerfully as you have is amazing. But that 10-year cycle, you think of the skill set you needed on the initially a business you acquired, step 1, 2, 3, 4, year 10, every one of those steps requires a, essentially a different business psychology, a different narrative, and so the ability to kind of orchestrate that, as everybody in this call are leaders in their organization, you you got to stay alert, nimble.
Yeah.
You have to recognize problems quickly and respond to them.
Yeah,
There's
I
a
mean,
lot of
it's a lot of
different.
this is about getting the right people on your team as well as
Yep.
you
Yeah.
move through. And the skills that you need change fundamentally during that time, and the skills that you value. And the business I ended up running had many more of the traits of a tech SaaS type business than the
Yes.
business I started with, which was a media and events business.
Yeah.
And the skills that you need and the emphasis that you place in terms of where you're recruiting during that journey change fundamentally. So I had no concept of the depth of product development resource that I would need at the end, the
Yeah.
depth of understanding of workflows, the depth of platforms and technology and user experience, the go-to-market strategies and the enterprise sales, and being able to hire people who could, with a straight face, ask for $500,000 as an annual subscription contract is very different from someone selling a classified ad for a used tractor at £50 or whatever else. It's a
Yeah.
totally different business. But the journey was fun, right? You get
Yeah. Yeah.
stimulated and learn new things as you go through. And the
Yeah.
irony is the business that I ended up running was probably very similar to the first business I ever worked in, but I just didn't really, there'd be no plan to get
Yeah.
to that. It had just gone full
Yeah.
circle.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good journey. It was good fun.
Yeah. Well, I've had the good luck, including somebody who's on this call right now, of hiring someone who came prior to coming to us from, sort of a SaaS background, more or less. Sorry to call you out, Lisa, but so we had somebody who was sort of ahead of us at that
Yeah.
time to pull us in that, and now that's where we are.
Well, the biggest
So
challenge is hiring
yeah,
some of those people, because I
yeah,
don't know the questions to ask them, especially around technology and some of those skills. How do I judge if someone's any good or is bullshitting me? It's
yeah,
really,
yeah,
it's really
yeah,
difficult. But when you
yeah,
find the right people and they can then lead that side, and you can build up that senior management team of trust and skills and respect and all of the things that you do, that's very
yeah,
powerful. But that is probably the biggest challenge,
yeah,
is hiring for skills which you can't do yourself.
yeah,
Most of the jobs I've done within media over the course of my life, media and events, so I can spot people who are good, but I was starting to have to hire people who I had never walked in their shoes,
yeah.
and that's difficult.
Well, I like to think strategically, and of everything you've said so far, the thing I've personally been most interested in is what kind of tractor was it? Anyway, Victoria, on that note, do you want to jump in if you don't mind? And you're muted.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I think Rory's covered quite a lot of what I was just asking
Oh,
in the but yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the scale of the product, doesn't it? But if you're starting out, if you were making this transition, thinking, okay, we're going to build some data products around existing, around existing media products, what are you looking for in something that's sort of what I'm calling state of the art, but something that, I mean, you talked about user experience and workflow, but expand on that a little bit.
So it is hard building this stuff. I don't want to make light of how difficult it is, and actually it's a lot easier to do what I did, which was buy someone else's hard work and then make it better, sort of layer on some commercial operations on top. I think if you're really trying to understand where the data opportunity is, or those pain points, there is no substitute from walking in the shoes of your customers, going and seeing them, day in the life. What do you do before and what do you do after you use my products? What are the things you find really difficult? Where are the pain points? who doesn't supply the things you need? Where are the gaps? And then you can start to at least frame where those efforts should be pointed, right? And so even when we had an established data product, a big part of our work was going in and saying, what's missing? Where does this break down? What's the bit you get to where you go, shit, I can't do that. I can't do that next stage. And that might be a product extension. It might be an adjacency to something that you do already. The difficulty is those conversations, everyone thinks they can have them themselves, but 99 times out of 100, when you go into a media or information business, they're not actually very good at it. You've got editorial people who think they know the answer before they start. And it's sometimes quite useful to have an external agency who doesn't have the sort of vested history and knowledge as much of your business working. So we use, I know you know the guys at Plural Strategy, for example. One of the good things for private equity business is you spend a huge amount of money on research and diligence. And often that research and diligence just sits in a back drawer for someone and they transact and then put it away. Our view of that research and diligence was that was our roadmap for where we needed to point efforts. So customers would tell us, you're really good at this. This is what you're not good at. They would tell us, these are the competitors we use, but there's a gap there. There's something that they're not doing that would be really valuable. And they would even prioritize some of those things. So we would, when we bought a business, we would know before we even walked in the front door, the top 3 things that we were going to extend and what we were going to do. And there's no substitute for that sort of, that really in-depth knowledge and understanding of pain points with your customers.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Could I mention the Renewed Summit in June? One of the sessions we have scheduled is I think it's called What do your customers need that you don't have? And part of that session is looking at a huge study Plural Strategies did last autumn, and I think they interviewed 1,500 business information consumers and got some really surprising results that I found helpful. So,
yeah, I saw that. It is good. And I think one of the, just to extend very finally on that point, one of the things that media owners are really bad about is surveying and understanding their customers. So when you ask them, generally the frame of what you're asking them is, what do you think of our product? What could we improve on our product? And that's the wrong starting point, right? So the question you need to be asking is, what don't we do? Or what do you do outside our product, or just before you use our product, or the 30 minutes after our product, or where do these things fall down? So it's not about, I've got this service and is it good or bad? It's actually about where are the pain points? Where are the things that you can address? And if you can start identifying those and putting real effort into the things which are the biggest pain, there's money there, right? Because people, you're solving a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that, Rory, that's perfect because we've got like a minute or 2 to go because we started just a little bit late, and this gives me the opportunity to hand it over to Robin, who I usually find whenever he asks anything, the session ends immediately. So this is like ideal from my point of view. Robin, you got the last question, and I would, just to wrap up, I'd also say I hope again, 67 bricks next month for On the Offense, and then the Renewed Summit in June. I hope to get to hang out with all my friends and see you all there, while we're all struggling trying to do what Rory's talking about every day. And it's nice to have companionship. And Rory, thank you for sharing, because you got an inspirational quality there, and you had a spectacular business. Congratulations. So
Thank you.
So Robin, you can take us out.
What a privilege. So I was just going to ask Rory, thinking about how AI and machine learning has just made the collection of data that much easier. I was just curious to hear him talk a little bit more about kind of what's next. So the sort of predictive angle on it. So really adding more value to customers in kind of the trends and what's going to happen next.
So yes, I mean, the world is awash with data, and your starting point is you want to have exclusivity around the data. You don't want it to be freely available, because otherwise what's the point of what you're doing? So we were very careful about where we release data and how we release data. And we kept quite a lot of it in a walled garden, in terms of there are lots of other companies who will partner left, right, and centre with redistributors and people who are using information, and then you just lose a little bit of control of it. So you're going to be very careful to start with about what is proprietary and what is general currency within the market. However, a lot of our customers came to us to access and paid us for information that was free, which seems counterintuitive. So the government, for example, in the States, the USDA, releases a whole load of mandatory pricing benchmarks for the products that we were working with. And in our diligence, the bankers said, well, why would we do that? This is provided free by the government. And actually, we provided quite a lot of utility to that data in terms of standardization, normalization, making sure it was vetted and controlled. It was produced, but the government is useless at publishing information. They publish it in a wide variety of different formats, and every now and again break or change the standards or whatever else. So how do you trust those things? And so at its heart, when we were providing data, it was about having trust of the audience. And we did external auditing of processes and things like that. But the journey, to come to your question about sort of predictive analytics, you have to start thinking about those layers of data that you provide. Okay, so there is value in normalizing data, presenting it in a consistent format, which is quite hard to find and quite hard to do. There is further value about looking at trends in that data, with usually some form of editorial expertise, rather than just letting a machine run. You can build correlation engines and all sorts of things that will predict the future, but you need some form of someone keeping that under control and making sure it doesn't go haywire.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get into forecasting. This is a trend that happened before. What happened in that environment? Coronavirus is a prime example. We could track what happened during the Spanish flu in American protein markets, for example, and start to infer what might happen in coronavirus. Obviously, very different circumstances, but you've got some trend lines that you can work with.
Yep.
And then I suppose the pinnacle of that is, if you think about normalized data, forecast data, the question your customer is asking then is, what should I do? Okay, they want an element of advisory around it. So in our space, I've given you a forecast. Tell me what I should do. Does that mean I should hedge my exposure to a future price movement in these things? Does that mean I should buy an annual contract, or I should buy forward, or I should delay my purchase, or whatever? Does it mean I should work with an insurer or risk management company? And so when you get into that type of level, AI can only go so far, right? Okay, those are really big decisions, and they require expertise overlaid on data. And AI and machine learning tools might help you in terms of building models, but you still need that expertise and trust and a layer on top of that. So that was where the business was going. And as you move up that chain, people pay you more for that information. The value of it goes up, and therefore the value of your business goes up. So that was a journey that we were definitely on, and the Mintech guys are now benefiting from the sort of background work we did of having more price series, more data, more proprietary data in longer time series, in order to be able to make those informed judgments for customers.
Yeah. That's a great answer. Thank you. I know we built a small algorithm which we have not monetized particularly well, but we've added it to a bunch of our other products that is sort of I would say the AI version of when, assuming you're part of a community of, let's say, 1,000 experts who do what you do, when the other 999 got to the point in the workflow that you're at right now, here's the outcomes of what they did. Like the power of it's sort of a AI engine exposing peer behaviors, less dramatic than what you're saying, Rory, but you think of the power and economic value behind that kind of knowledge and psychological comforts. So Rory, that was totally fun for me. So we stayed with the fun thing. I still want the tractor. It's great
It's
great
gift wrapped and on its way to you, David.
Okay. Oh my God, this is the best day of my life. Okay. Thank you everyone for signing in. It's nice to do it on the offense after a bit of a break there. Good to be back, and hopefully we'll see you all soon next month in June and beyond. Take care, everyone.